Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this evening's briefing, Locked In, Reimagining Parole in Alabama. My name is Anisha Hardy. I am the Executive Director of Alabama Values, and I am so glad that you can just join us this evening for this very important conversation. This briefing is made possible by Justice in Focus. It is an Alabama Values narrative initiative in collaboration with the Alabama Justice Initiative, the Beacon Center in Flourish, Alabama. This initiative is centered around getting Alabamians to rethink and reimagine what public safety truly means and how we can work together to build a system that is fair and that is just for everyone. Right now, Alabama's parole system is, some would say, failing our people. They're not doing enough, right? We've seen the approval rates, last year was only 8%. And while they are increasing, that's just not enough. And all of this is happening while our prisons remain overcrowded and many people who pose no risk to public safety are still behind bars. And that, folks, is the characteristics of a system that isn't about rehabilitation. It's about punishment without an end. And that is why we're here tonight. Because this has to change. And we must start having these conversations. We must start educating each other. We must, start strategizing together. So I encourage you to take what you learned here tonight and share it within your community circles, have kitchen table conversations, and also, tap in with the organizations that you'll hear from tonight. Each of us, will play a role in bringing about the change that we want to see in this system. And we are fortunate to have an incredible group of speakers tonight. Veronica Johnson, who will serve as our moderator, serves as the Deputy Director of the Alabama Justice Initiative. Alison Mollman is the Legal Director for the ACLU of Alabama. Katie Glenn, the Senior Policy Associate at the Southern Poverty Law Center, and Pat Vandermeer, a board member at Alabama Cure, and John Woods is, representing an individual who has been directly impacted by the Alabama's parole system. And most importantly, beyond the titles, the speakers here tonight are all deeply connected to this issue, whether it's through legal expertise, policy work, and personal experiences. I do feel that they will be bringing valuable insights on how we can really push for a more, just and equitable parole system. So thank you for being here and for caring and for showing up. This fight is about more than just policy. It's about people, and it's about, what's right. And with that, I want to turn it over to our moderator and Justice in Focus partner, Veronica Johnson.
Thank you so much, Anisha. I really appreciate just the opportunity for us to be able to voice what we have been doing here in the state. I want to take this time out to thank Alabama Values and everyone who has been working with us so diligently to ensure that our message is heard. Not only is it heard here in the state of Alabama, but throughout the country. So I really appreciate you, and I thank you for that. So tonight, some of the things that we're going to take away, or some of the key takeaways for tonight, we're going to give you an overview of Alabama's parole system and the current challenges that they face. We're going to look at some of the key issues and barriers to fair parole decisions. Many of us know that parole decisions here in Alabama, they aren't fair. So although they are minimal at best, when people are released on parole, it's typically not people of color. We're going to also look at innovative solutions and reforms to improve the system and how you can get involved in this movement, right? So we have a couple of people here on this screen that works diligently in ensuring that the parole system is seeing changes. But also we have people in the community that want to join this fight. So at the end of this, or at some point during this, we're going to give you our information for all of our organizations, so that you will be able to join in with us on the fight. Today is October 14th, which is Indigenous Peoples Day. So we want to begin by taking this time to acknowledge Indigenous People Day. I want to take a moment to acknowledge that today is Indigenous People Day, a time to honor the histories, the culture, and the contributions of Indigenous people. As we reflect on the injustices within our criminal justice system, it's important to recognize that the deep legacy systemic oppression and marginalization that indigenous communities, like other communities of colors, have long endured. In our conversations about parole reform, let us hold space for the ongoing struggles of all communities impacted by unjust systems and work toward a more just and equitable future. So, with that being said, I'm going to introduce our speakers. So we have the lovely Miss Pat Vandermeer. Pat Vandermeer is a board member with Alabama Cure, who's very passionate about elderly parole. And so she's worked with us and she's brought her skills and her expertise to the table to ensure that the system is equitable for the elderly population. We have Katie Glenn, who is a senior policy associate with Southern Poverty Law Center. Katie is the person who we send to make all the changes to the policies that we're attempting to make. So Katie really has the job of going in and speaking with representatives, speaking with legislators and senators, and the things that we discuss. She's typically the one who carries that information to them. So she's really part of this wheel. We have Alison Mollman, who is the legal director with ACLU of Alabama. Alison comes with much experience. I know she looks like she's only 24, but she comes with many years of experience where she was legal. She represented many people when she was working with EJI. And now she's like the boss at ACLU Alabama. So she brings tons of legal expertise, and each and every person on here brings tons of passion with them. And then we have John Woods. John has been directly impacted by the criminal justice system here in the state of Alabama, where he served an extensive amount of time in the Department of Corrections, but he was released on parole. But prior to him being released, there were many opportunities for them to release him, but they did not, which not only impacted him and impacted his family as well. So tonight we're going to go ahead and we're going to discuss that. So the way we have it set up, we have a panel of questions, and we're going to ask everybody their questions. I'll moderate. I'll talk a little. Everybody knows I'm a talker. So I'll talk a little, but then we'll give each panelist an opportunity to answer specific questions. Is everybody okay with that? All right. So John, the first question is for you. Alabama's parole system has been criticized for inconsistencies in the way it disproportionately impacts marginalized communities. So in other words, marginalized communities would be the poor communities, the Black communities, brown communities, those indigenous people that we speak of. So it is known that the Alabama parole system does not treat that particular group of people the same as it would other citizens of the state. As we seek to address these issues, it's important to understand the root challenges. John, can you speak to the key issues that you see, right? The key issues that you see facing Alabama's parole system today, and how these challenges disproportionately affect communities of colors. So in other words, John, how did the rejections of you and your friends or any other people that you know that are familiar with or have been up before the parole board, what was that impact like? What was it like for you? What was it like for people that you know? And how does it affect people of color? Go ahead.
Well, speaking from my situation first, by me being incarcerated and coming up for parole like numerous times and being denied, which is set off for years, it kind of, after the first time me being denied, it bothered me a lot mentally, and I was like kind of destroyed for about a year or so, because I had expectations that, this is what I was told from the beginning, like, you do this many amount of years, and if you do right, you will be released. That's what I was under the impression that was told to me like 10 years before I ever came up one time. And so after that, I had started losing confidence and faith in people, or the people who was down at the parole place, the parole board, saying like, I was going to get out. So it started taking a toll like on my mother and on my father, going down and, you know, being promised, like after the first time they said, well, we'll let him go the next time after 5 years of being denied. And then when I came back up, that didn't happen. It was the denial again to be turned down. And so, you know, it started taking a toll like on my mother and them and my father and family members and friends, folks who was expecting to me be released. And then, you know, like, and then you come up again, fear and doubt kind of sits in and go through your mind, like, you know, after seeing so many people being turned down, and just other people but yourself, it kind of come to a point you be like, well, I probably won't make it. You know what I'm saying? That's just be like, you don't have no trust and no faith in God or something like that, then a higher power, you will be thinking like that. And you know, after so many times, so many set-offs and setbacks from other guys, they start to think like that. You can just speak to them and listen to them and talk to them, and they be like, they ain't gonna let me go. They ain't gonna let me go. They ain't let such and such go. Then, you know, a person may have a worse charge or worse sentence than those individuals, and they may have something that was small or something, said like a theft charge or something like that. You just stole something out the grocery store or something like that, or out of a store. Like you may went in the store and stole a drill or something in Lowe's, and you get turned down for just, you know, you stole something at that time, you know, and it was something that you did that, you know what I'm saying, that you probably won't do again if you ever had the opportunity. But they don't view it like that. They look at it as, you know, you did it one time, you may do it again, you just trying to get out. But then a person come up who may have a attempted murder charge or a robbery charge, they gonna automatically think to themselves, well, you haven't let me go before. And I just seen a man who stole out a store get turned down. So certainly I'm gonna get turned down. And for example, I'm gonna use this as an example. I talked to a guy maybe about 2 weeks ago, and I had talked to him. He came home. He's in the work release right now. I'm not gonna say his name because I don't want to, you know, mess up his situation. But he came home on pass from the work release, and we talked. He actually contacted me, and I stopped by his mom's house to talk to him or whatever. And we had talked for a good little while because I stayed over there for a while. And this is what he said. He said, I supposed to come up for parole in 2025 in September. So he said, that's the date that I got. He said, but they ain't gave me no date. They just gave me the month for 2025. He said, but now I've been in the work release for 7 years. He said, but ever since the pandemic been over with, I've been working now. He said, I've been working now, had a job. I ain't lost my job. I've been coming home on passes ever since, he said, for 2.5 years. He said, so how much more time do they want me to do in a work release? He said, I'm coming home. He said, I'm going out into society every day, working a real job. He said, and I go home every other week. He said, I haven't did, and I've been there for 7 years. He said, what more can you get out of me in a work release? He said, are you just holding me for the money? You know, this is what he was telling me, that, you know, that's how he was viewing the thing. And he was like, he said, I don't know what to believe. He said, bro, I've been at the work release for 7 years. He said, I had a job before the pandemic, had a job after the pandemic because they wouldn't let nobody, you know, go out because of COVID. He said, but now that I've been back working out here for 2.5 years, what more can you get out of me? I said, you're right. I said, they just holding you. He said, they holding me for, is it for the money? He said, because surely they need other bed space for folks that's coming because of the overcrowding. And I didn't know what to tell, bro.
That's very that's very disheartening, like especially the fact that he's kind of been in the community for 7 years and been working. And so those are some of the struggles that we face, or some of the things that we're impacted by when we look at parole here in the state of Alabama. So the next question, so recent changes in legislation have drastically shifted parole outcomes in our state, creating rippling effects on those eligible for paroles and their loved ones. Again, we can't leave the family out, because a lot of times, even though the family is not behind the wall, they're still doing time with their loved one. Can each of you share insight into how these changes have affected parole decisions and what the potential long-term consequences are for family? So in other words, in terms of, and we know this, that the parole rate it declined to about 2 or 3%. Now it's gone up. We got 6%. But what results does that have on the family members, or the potential long-term consequences? And if everybody, or however you all want to do it, if one or two people want to answer, if everybody want to answer, you can go ahead.
Yeah, I can really briefly kick us off with sort of an overview of where legislation has gone in the last few years. And then, of course, the other folks here have a lot more specific expertise than I do. But what I can say is in 2019, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in depth a little bit later in this discussion, I think. But in 2019, there were some pretty drastic changes made to the Alabama parole system. So the director of the Bureau of Pardons and Paroles was elevated to a cabinet level position, and the way in which parole is done was shifted. And this was all the result of public backlash from one really tragic incident where an individual who was out on parole murdered 3 people. And because of that, the Alabama legislature essentially completely locked down parole for everyone in Alabama. That's the way that we legislate in this state. We're reactionary. And when I say we, I'm talking about the legislature. So we saw a complete redrawing, excuse me, of the way in which parole is done, the way in which the guidelines are written, et cetera. I will come back to the guidelines again later as well. But what that meant in practice was a man named Charlie Graddick was appointed as the director of the Alabama Bureau of Pardons and Paroles. He is famous for several political positions over the years, but in particular for being a judge who suggested that for certain people who are convicted of crimes, we should, quote, fry them until their eyeballs pop out. And so that's the kind of person we were working with starting in 2019. He canceled all parole hearings. He blamed it on the victim notification requirements in the new law that was passed. We had no parole hearings for, I think, 3 months. And then when they resumed, as Veronica indicated, the grant rates went down pretty substantially. Since then, there's a new director of the Bureau of Pardons and Paroles. We have some new parole board members, et cetera. But there have not been any positive substantive changes to the parole system legislatively. There have been successful legislative efforts to eat away at things like good time. So when people were given incentive time for their behavior or completion of programming in while incarcerated, the opportunities for that have been greatly reduced, both by executive order and by legislation. Attempts to do things like what we have all worked on together, some of us here on this call, like provide different and new opportunities for parole for people who are ill or who are elderly, attempts to create a second parole board to deal with some of this backlog, et cetera, have all been unsuccessful. So the legislative landscape, as you asked, Veronica, has not been a positive one. The guidelines that the parole board uses, if they actually followed them, something like 70% of people who are up for parole would be paroled. And we're seeing numbers, I think now we're seeing numbers as high as maybe like in the 20% range of people who are up for parole being paroled. And historically, we've seen as low as 1%, 2%, and 3% in a month. So that's just like a very brief overview of where we are legislatively currently.
And I'm happy to take it from here to talk about what the consequences of that are for incarcerated people and their families. Literally, people are dying in Alabama's prisons and at their work release facilities because they're being denied parole. Oftentimes, it's like every week we hear about a tragedy. We hear about people at work release being struck by a car and being killed while doing road service. We hear about homicides at level 4 prisons. And oftentimes I'll look up the people that are killed because we don't identify who they are. We don't identify what their stories are. But if you do that, you see that many of these people have gone up for parole in the last 3 years and they've been denied. And so had they been granted parole, had the parole board followed their guidelines, people would be returning to their families and not dying. So I think that when we talk about the consequences of legislation and we talk about being reactionary in this state, we're reactionary in one way. We're punitive, but we're not reactionary when it comes to trauma and horrors happening in our prison system, which we've known about for years, and which the Department of Justice and our federal government is suing the state of Alabama over. So these are literally life and death decisions. And we have to be mindful of that. We've been at the legislature many, many times, all of us on this call, and we keep hearing, come back next year, come back next year. And each time we come back next year, we lose more and more people. So my hope is that we can see some meaningful change here, because the status quo is not working and it's killing people that could safely return to their families.
Veronica, I go to prisons 3 days a week and with classes. And when the parole board dropped to the virtual no parole, what I was seeing and hearing from the men, because I go to two men's prisons, was hopelessness. Why do I need a GED? It's not going to help me. Why do I need to take that Auburn writing class? Why do I need to do this? Learn a trade? It didn't make a difference. And what we saw was more drugs and more violence in these facilities. And we've got to change this, because there are a lot of men and women who've transformed their lives, that need to be back into the community.
John, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I can speak to what she just said. That I agree with that to the fullest, because I was there. I was one of those people, and like she said, I got a GED there. I took the Auburn art class. I got 2 trades, and guys be there and they get all these programs. They get all the programs that you can get, so they can't get no more. And they have these clear records, and they go up, and the people still turn them down. Like, I understand what they're saying, like it ain't really doing no good, but people get this stuff to use it when they leave the prison, and they get it, because this is what being said, that you need to have this stuff, some things that are required to get out. And as well as like the young lady had said back in 2019, when they cut the paroles out, cut everything out, I so happened just that year to get granted parole, like beginning of the year in January, before that took place with that individual, that guy that caught the charge when he had got released. And I thank God, what I'm saying, that, not saying that I don't want to see no other guys granted who I feel like deserve to be granted, because there's a lot of guys that is worthy to be out here in society who have done X amount of years incarcerated that should be released. Like, you do 20, 30 years, that's a long time, but guys been a set there for so long, just like the guy who at the work release been there for 7 years. He been incarcerated now for like 18 years. He been down 18 years, and he got all the trades, he got everything. Just using him as a prime example. And he don't have nothing but one robbery charge. He have a robbery charge, and he didn't shoot nobody, hurt nobody, nothing like that. But he robbed somebody on the street, they press charges. He been down for 18 long years. And he told me he ain't had a disciplinary. Now he told me he haven't had a disciplinary in 12 years. He haven't had a disciplinary. He done 18. He had a disciplinary in 12 years and got all these trades and all this stuff. Like, it's me, I think he should be let go. I don't understand why he done been up 2 times at the work release and have been denied. He just went up. He went up last year. So when he go back up next year, that'll be 2 years that they turn him down. I can't fathom. I can't even understand why it's like that.
Yeah. So we the consequences, right? So we have people on the inside that they're feeling hopelessness. We have an increased drug use and murder rate. And like both Katie and Alison said, this all stems from literally one situation where the legislators decide to take reactionary measures instead of finding like some alternatives. So yeah, that's where we are. So Pat, while challenges persist, there are also powerful grassroots movements advocating for change in Alabama's parole system. Pat, can you give us an outline of some key reform solutions being proposed by these groups and how they aim to build a more just, equitable system?
Sure. Well, there's organizations that Katie and Alison and I are part of, the People's Parole Reform Coalition, that has smaller organizations like Alabama Cure and larger organizations like Southern Poverty Law Center and ACLU. And currently, we're working on 2 bills, but I'm going to start though with the bill that Representative England introduced about a parole board accountability. And here, this bill would have a committee that would have oversight over the parole board, and that they would also have the parole board follow guidelines. Which is interesting is they do have guidelines, but they don't follow them. And this would make sure that they did. And if they deviated from the guidelines, the person coming up for parole would have an opportunity to appeal. And this is important because so many people that do come up, like John's friend who is doing everything right, has been on work release. Why are they being denied? And if they followed the guidelines, that person would have probably been paroled years ago. So that's one bill. That's a brief overview of that bill. Another is the virtual parole bill. And here we are one of only 2 states in the country that does not allow people to have a presence in their parole hearing. And this is incredibly important to show the transformation, the changes that a person has, because they're just looking at a picture, they're looking at their file. So this is also very important and is needed. And then finally, the one that you alluded to, Veronica, elder, and then also medical parole. Our prisons are becoming nursing homes. And it is costly. It's unjust. These people are not going to commit crimes. I had the opportunity 2 years ago to go to a birthday party at Donaldson. And it was a birthday party for a person who is turning 104 years old. Why is this person in prison? People are aging. A dear friend who I've known almost 10 years, I'm watching him slowly go into dementia. Again, he does not need to be there. And so we're looking at these kinds of bills that could have major effects on our system and just the equality and just the justness of this system. So these are just some of the things that we've been working on and that could have major effects. There's more that we could and hopefully we would love to do. We're still have the same legislators, and we need to change that. There was the Joint Oversight Committee meeting this summer, and it affected some of the legislators. And we need to have more of that kind of thing because these legislators need to see that these are people, humans. Too often our community looks at the people who are incarcerated as animals. And we can't have that because we all have dignity and we all need respect. So we're trying to do things and we need more things need to be happening.
Thank you, Pat. So yes, we have major legislation that small organizations have teamed up with big organizations like the ACLU and SPLC, Alabama Cure, Redemption Earned, Alabama Justice Initiative. We've all been working together to ensure that we can have some changes. So we're hopeful. We are hopeful about what the future brings in terms of the various legislation we're attempting to work with. So I thank you so much for that, Pat. Alison, it could be helpful to look beyond our own state for ideas. So basically, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel, and we say that all the time. Like, if we find something that works, we like, okay, we're gonna go with it. How does Alabama's parole system stack up against those in other states? And what are the best practices we could adopt to better support parolees and create fairer outcomes?
Yeah, thank you, Veronica. So throughout my legal career for the last 12 years, I've been in Alabama, but particularly when I was at EJI, I had the opportunity to do parole work in other states, Louisiana and Iowa in particular. And there's several models from those states that Alabama could easily and affordably adopt that would make our system better. So one of those Pat already mentioned, virtual presence at parole hearings. We have the equipment at the prisons. When COVID came around, they had to get everything set up for virtual court appearances. So we have the technology in the state, we have the time, we have the resources, we know how to do it. We just need to do it. We need to give people an opportunity to virtually participate in their parole hearings. The other thing I've seen in other states has to do with what we call as set-off times. So in Alabama, you can be set off or you can have to wait for another parole hearing up to 5 years. That's a really, really long time. And I think a lot of times we hear in the legislature them wanting to move things so that everybody has to wait 5 years. But in states like Louisiana, most people wait 1 year, and the maximum people will wait is 2 years before they can go up for another parole hearing. In Iowa, it's a year. And Iowa has a process that I think really makes a lot of sense from a public safety perspective and from common sense. So in Iowa, part of why they're considering people every year is they have a system of gradual release. So for my clients that I worked with there, the parole board would first approve them to go to almost a work release type situation where they're working outside the gates and then have to come back in the gates at night to go to sleep. If that goes well for a year, then they get a move to more of a reentry home type space. My clients in Iowa, by the time they were fully granted parole, they had apartments, they had jobs, many of them had their driver's licenses, and that was all created through Iowa's gradual release process. It was about prioritizing rehabilitation rather than punishment. So that was a system that I thought was really effective and that we could do here. And the third piece of this is more tangentially related to parole, but I think it's really important when we talk about opposition, particularly from victims. So in states like Iowa, and I've seen this in Louisiana as well, they have restorative justice processes. And so I worked with clients who had victims come to their first parole hearings and oppose, say, I don't want this person to ever get out of prison. But what those state systems provided that Alabama doesn't is for victims that wanted to engage with the person that had caused them and their family harm, they could go through a restorative justice process with the Department of Corrections. And so it would start out with letters. A social worker would facilitate the exchange of letters between the incarcerated person and the victim or the victim's family. And then if that process went well, they would arrange for the victims to come to the prison and have an in-person conversation mediated by a social worker. And so I literally, with one client, in a matter of 3 years, it went from staunch opposition to these victims feeling like they had actually healed in some ways, that they had reached forgiveness. Oftentimes we talk about forgiveness as if we're giving it to someone else, but it's really something we do for ourselves. We are freer when we forgive. To see that not only was our client getting the outcome that they deserved, that they had earned to get granted parole, but they were doing so with a victim's family that was supportive of that, who understood that this person is ready. And so I think that when Alabama is thinking about what we can do, we don't have to look far. We can look to Louisiana, we can look to Iowa. These are not like progressive blue states like California. They're a lot like Alabama. They're working class states. And so I just think that there are things that we could do that would be better for public safety and that would bring more people home and stay home. So I hope that we'll continue to work on those projects in our coalition, because I think it's something that if our legislators could get on board for, it would make our entire state better.
Very well said. And the fact that you used Iowa and Louisiana and their conservative states as well, and they are more like us than they are different, and they have different approaches that they're using to ensure that their people are getting parole. I think that's excellent. Best choices or best practices. The next question is for Katie Glenn. Katie, public opinion and political will are powerful forces that shape policy decisions. Oh, you know that all too well, right? Can you speak to the role of public perception and political pressure in Alabama's parole policies and how grassroots organizations are working to shift the narrative on reform?
Absolutely. So I want to start with how they've shifted them so far, and then I want to talk a little bit about how it looks like there is an opportunity for grassroots pressure to shift things going forward. So I mentioned this briefly, but in 2019, as I said, there was someone who was out on parole who murdered 3 people. And as a result of that, the Alabama legislature decided to completely overhaul the entire parole system, right? The reality of the situation is, number one, the bill that was passed never would have impacted this person's release. It is sort of like inside baseball, but the issue was with the Department of Corrections, not with BPP. This person wouldn't have been released had this bill been passed in 2017. But the reason legislators did that is because they heard from constituents, because this was a high profile issue. It was all over the news, and they decided this is what their constituents want. This is what we're going to do. Similarly, in, I think it was 2022, when the bills about good time were passed, again, that was one incident where the legislature said, okay, because one person who at some point in their incarceration may have received good time, incentive time, right? We're going to take it away for everyone. And they do this because they think this is what the public wants, because they have, this small group of very loud voices, typically the district attorneys and the victim advocate association, saying, this is what the people want. This is what the people need. This is what you have to do. And these organizations, quite frankly, have done a really good job of mounting that political pressure with legislators. They wield that pressure very powerfully, and you will see legislators react to things differently when they hear from those groups. And that's a lesson for those of us who want to see a more just and fair Alabama, right? It's a lesson for us in how we organize and how we react. And I will say, Alabama's prisons have been a terrible place for a very long time. For whatever reason, that fact has really got legislators' attention at the moment. So we know that the Department of Justice announced its investigation and then subsequent lawsuits starting in 2019. It's now 2024. We've had that, the letter dropped in April of 2019. So we've had, sorry, math is really hard right now, like 6 legislative sessions since then. And unfortunately, every year, we feel like we've made some ground, and then something high profile happens and we feel like we take 2 steps back. But what has changed recently was in December of 2023, there was a meeting of the Joint Prison Oversight Committee, which is just a group of 6 legislators, 3 from the House, 3 from the Senate, who are appointed to this committee and meet to discuss issues in the prisons. And because of a bill we passed with Representative England several years ago, at least one of their meetings a year has to provide an opportunity for public comment. And at that meeting, we heard from family members, friends, etc., but mostly moms who came in and begged for their sons' lives. And it was devastating. It was, I've sat through a lot of really terrible legislative meetings. That was the saddest, most heart-wrenching meeting I've ever sat through, because it was not only moms begging for their sons' lives, it was moms coming to tell the story about how the state of Alabama failed them, and their son was murdered by correctional officers, or their son died of an overdose. And I keep saying son because many of these people were coming to talk about the men that they love who are currently incarcerated. One of the people who came told a story about, I think it was a nephew, it was a family member who they were worried about, who died in between that meeting and the start of the legislative session. And it was clear that that meeting affected some of those members on that panel. Unfortunately, those legislators did not get proposals together in time for the next legislative session, which started just 2 months later, and we didn't see a lot of change. But then there was another meeting in July, which was only 6 months later. They weren't obligated to have another 7 months later, another public hearing that quickly. But the chair, a man named Senator Clyde Chambliss, who's from the Elmore, Autauga area, has been very moved by these stories and very, very moved by his conversations with family members. And so there was another meeting, and it was even bigger. Even more family members came. Family members who came last time came back to talk about how things have not changed. And I've never been to an optional committee meeting in the middle of summer where legislators who are not on that committee show up. And I think there were like a dozen. So there's 6 legislators on the committee, and something like a dozen came who were not on that committee because they've been hearing from constituents because they're interested in this now. And it's not just, people who you might guess ideologically would side with reform-minded advocates. It was folks from across the political spectrum who are fed up with what is happening in Alabama's prisons. And that is integrally connected to what is happening with our parole system, right? Our prisons are incredibly overcrowded. As John sort of laid out for us, there are people there with so little hope left now who are sort of acting and living out of desperation that they might never leave these walls. And so that meeting happened again, and more people came, and there was more media coverage. And since then, in conversations with legislators, I have heard that we are in a moment where something might happen, where something might change, where people who previously had disagreed with us might be interested in having a conversation. And that is because of the political power and the organizing of grassroots groups and of family members and people who are directly impacted by the Alabama legislature's decisions. There are people who are formerly incarcerated who have gotten up at each of those meetings to talk about what it was like for them to go up for parole. I think most legislators, I could say, have never attended a parole hearing. They have no idea what happens. They don't know the process. And so hearing from people with really that expertise, I think, is quite powerful as well. There is, for people who are listening, another meeting coming up on October 23rd at 10 a.m., 10:30 a.m., excuse me. It is not a public hearing, but being there, bearing witness to these decisions, talking to the legislators before and after the meeting is still important. And once again, I have heard from legislators who are not on that committee that they're coming. And this is new for me. So I've been only doing this since 2016. But this sort of reaction from legislators is new to me. And I know that it's both that they've heard from people in person, that they've gotten really devastating emails, videos, text messages from people who are currently in Alabama's prisons, from their loved ones, et cetera. And I think it's making a difference. The sad thing is, I was going to say the Alabama legislature is the Titanic and it can't turn quickly, but I think it's even worse than that, right? The tides take a while to turn, and it feels sometimes like they never will. But I do think the only thing that has the possibility to change them is people with the expertise of what life is like inside those buildings, what life is like for their loved ones, are the only ones who have the power to help make that change. I would love for every legislator to hear directly from someone who has been through the Alabama parole process, right, before they start making these decisions. That's not been the case for many of them so far. I think they are starting to, and I think that's why we're seeing this shift.
Thank you so much for that, Katie. Couple of things that I kind of want to add to that. So when the Department of Justice decided to sue the Alabama Department of Correction, I think it's so important for our listening audience to know that Donald Trump was president and William Barr was the Attorney General. So a lot of times people want to play politics, or they want to put the things that are going on political parties, but that's not the case. That's not the case at all. Alabama prisons are really an unjust system that's filled with killing and drugs. So that DOJ lawsuit is a strong reminder of just how unjust Alabama prisons are. Also, it feels good to have been in this work or to have been in this space and to finally have legislators to actually listen to us. So that's rare. That's few and far between. It's like a rare gem, a rare jewel. And if you get it, you just got to take it and you got to hold it and value it. And so that's what we're doing this legislative session. We're valuing our time, because this is not something that we would normally be able to do, because they really don't want to hear us, or they don't want to see us coming. Like, they run from us, like literally, because they don't want to hear the things that we're going to say. So thank you for that. So we're going to go into our last question, our last formal question. Well, no, we got two more questions. I'm sorry. Collaborative efforts are critical in driving meaningful change. For all the panelists, how can community members and activists come together to raise awareness about the legislative changes needed to ensure the parole process is more transparent and accessible? And for this particular question, I think I'm going to answer it as well. So this is one of those situations where I work for a small grassroots nonprofit. We're located in Birmingham, Alabama, but we do work throughout the state. A lot of my work would not be possible if it was not for ACLU, SPLC, Alabama Cure, and we all work together in order to ensure that everybody has what they need to succeed. How are we ensuring that the parole process is better? So collectively, we come together, we develop plans and ideas of how we want to see this work. We establish what we think would be most beneficial. And here's the thing, it's the reason why I have so much respect for these ladies. Each and every last one of us are entitled to our own opinions, and they often differ. However, because we realize that the work is not about us, but it's about the people within the state, we listen to one another, we respect one another. And so it's because of things like that, we're going to make the changes that we need in the state of Alabama. So, and I'll pass it to whoever want to answer that next.
To go. So a project that the ACLU of Alabama started last summer is called Parole Watch, and we modeled it after court watching programs in other states. So what folks have noticed through court watching programs is when people are present, when they're visible in spaces, it's harder for injustice to happen. It's harder for it to go unnoticed. So in 2020, the summer of 2023, we attended every parole hearing over a period of 10 weeks and put out a report about our findings of that. Since then, we still go every week. We can't go every day. We don't have as many people as we'd love to on staff to be able to do that, but we go at least once a week. And so for those of you who are interested and have capacity and time, every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday in Montgomery, there are parole hearings happening. They usually begin around 8 a.m. They're open to the public. Anyone can come. And I think it's really important, if you're someone who cares about parole, if you have the ability to go, because there's things that happen in that room that you can't read about, you can't see unless you're physically there. So that's one thing that I think is really important, is us physically going to those hearings and making sure that those 3 board members know that we're watching, and that we're going to hold them to account if they're not following their guidelines and giving people a chance to safely and responsibly re-enter society. The other piece of this that I really want to uplift is it's great to have all of these, organizations that come together. But we're most effective when we're uplifting folks like John and folks that are directly impacted by this system. And so when Katie was talking about these prison oversight committee meetings, one thing I just wanted to flag for folks who go to those in the future, they're only letting 20 people sign up for public comment. And we've seen at the last few meetings that there's been folks that have signed up and haven't been able to make it. And then those spots, they don't necessarily fill. So all I would say is that we should really make sure that the folks that want to speak, that can be there and can speak, let's let them do so. I think sometimes it's hard for organizations because we want to put ourselves out there and we want to be like ACLU of Alabama, SPLC, AJI, standing up and speaking. But the way that we can be most effective is to uplift and empower the voices of people who are living these experiences every day and who legislators really need to hear from. So come to parole hearings and come to the legislature and do what you can to uplift those that really, really need to have their voices heard.
Thank you, Alison. Anyone else want to come in on that question?
I think one of the things that I try to do, and again, going into the prisons, is to tell the men, and again, I go to men's prisons, that they can't just complain. They need to talk to their families, their friends. And as Katie said, our legislators need to hear from them and their stories, and how powerful that can be. And they have to vote. There's a lot of legislators who will never want to do anything. We have an attorney general who only wants to keep people incarcerated. And we have to tell our friends and family that it has to change. We can't just build prisons anymore. We have to let people out. And I think, we're doing a good job putting up legislation, and there's also groups that are doing a lot of work with nonviolent offenders. But at some point, our prisons are being filled with violent offenders. And if we don't look at that, changes, and not just to certain crimes, but people with life and life without parole. Those I see, I'm going to a level 5 prison, but we have to change this. I see people transformed every day I go that can be committed and be part of our community. And if we really believe in rehabilitation, if it is the Department of Corrections, we really need to do more.
I like that, Pat. If it's really the Department of Corrections, it will most definitely do what needs to be done. Did anybody else want to say anything about that? All right, y'all. So we're gonna go ahead and just bring this to a close. So in bringing this to a close, I just want to emphasize the urgency of addressing Alabama's parole backlog. We know Alabama's parole system is extremely backlogged. For the panelists, what immediate steps should policymakers and communities take to ensure timely hearings and fair consideration for those eligible for parole? And just short, y'all, because John has a couple of questions that came from the audience that we need to answer. So whoever want to take that.
I think the most substantive thing that legislators could do this legislative session is make the parole board follow its own guidelines. That would fix things, not fix things, but that would make a huge difference overnight. And 2, acknowledge the fact that, as Pat said, the Alabama Department of Corrections has the largest nursing home and mental health care provider in the state of Alabama. Let people who are ill and who are elderly out of prison. Let them go home to their families who are ready to take care of them, to support them, and let them, for so many of them, see the end of their life with dignity.
I've got a quick one. We should expand the parole board. 3 members is too small for a state as big as this. Most states have at least 7 board members, and they'll rotate which 3 appear on any hearing. So 3 is too few, especially when one is missing. We see days when there's only 2 board members and there will be deadlocks. And so then that person has to go all back up a few months later. So a very simple solution is we expand the board.
That's good. We really need to or have about 4 or 5 boards, but that's a question for another day. Okay, so thank you all so much. So we have a couple of questions from the audience. John, where was the person who you talked about who's on work release? Do you know where they were on work release, or where did he work while he was on work release? Thank you.
He had one job where he said he worked at Arby's, and then he had another job where he worked at it's a steel place up here in Birmingham, over by in the Avondale, Kingston area, over that way. It's a plant over there. He worked at that place because he's at Chillisburg work release.
Okay, got you. Okay. So what are some ways those of us with loved ones inside can keep track of the abuses and injustice for official records and historical references?
There's a few ways to do that. So one is you can contact an organization like the ACLU of Alabama or the Equal Justice Initiative. Several organizations like ours work closely with the Department of Justice, and when there's permission for us to pass along reports, we're always happy to get that forward to the DOJ. The other thing is that we're willing to go meet with incarcerated folks and to catalog their stories and to make sure that if there is an injustice, to see if we can help or someone else can help. So I'll be happy to drop the ACLU of Alabama's legal intake link in the chat, but that's one way that we're happy to help you all catalog what's happening. And if you're interested to get those reports to the Department of Justice.
And I'll just very quickly follow up on Allison's question, or Allison's answer to Matt's question, because Ralph's question in the chat reminded me of something. So you should, as a member of the Alabama public, have the opportunity every 3 years to comment on the parole guidelines and say, this is awful. These are wrong and bad. You should do better. So they were last revised in 2019. And surprise, surprise, the 2022 deadline came, 2023 came, 2024 came, and the board has not revised the parole guidelines. They know this, but there's no entity saying, hey, if you don't do this, you're going to get in trouble. It is written in Alabama statute. That bill that was passed in 2019 requires them to revise the guidelines every 3 years and provide an opportunity for public comment. And they've simply not done that. So we're hopeful that we can raise a little cane about that, make a point, and hopefully the board will do what it is statutorily required. And when the time comes, that public comment opportunity will be really important.
Thank you guys both for answering that. So the next question, she was a GED at a men's prison, and so she says there's no incentive or benefit for bettering themselves. So how can we expect prison to be rehabilitative? It's a good question when there's no incentive there. Anybody want to take that? I mean, to be honest with you, we can't expect it to be rehabilitative. Everybody, people work off incentives, kind of like that's how the world is. That's how we've been trained and conditioned. So when you have nothing to look forward to, if you know, even though getting your GED would be beneficial to you, but if you have no place to use the GED, what's the purpose in getting it? So it's not rehabilitative. Like Pat said, it's not corrective. It is strictly punitive. It is strictly a punitive measure. So does the state of Alabama really want to reintegrate members back into society, or do you want them to remain behind the wall? And that's what we're trying to figure out, and that's what we're trying to do the workaround to pass like additional parole bills or get different parole bills changed so that the system will be the rehabilitative / corrective system that it was initially designed to be. This question is for John. Can you share some of the things that help keep you hopeful while you were facing such devastating, hopeless odds? I'd love to spread more of those resources, skills, ideas to people inside. So what did you use? What helped you get over the hump?
Well, let me see. I kept the mentality for all the years I did, and it's just the truth. Every day I kept a mentality that one day I was coming home. I always told myself and kept some type of faith, some type of hope that one day I was going to be released. Although I ain't going to tell you that every day I kept that faith and that hope that I would be released, that no doubt or fear that never creep in, because I'd be lying to you due to the fact that me just being denied, being turned down 5 years twice. I was denied 5 years twice. And then, just to get to come up that third time and get granted. But in the process of all that, like Miss Pat, excuse me, people coming back into the prison, I'm seeing people like this. I'm talking to people like this, and they was telling us to like keep the faith, keep the hope alive, and so much of like attending church services and stuff like that, meeting people like that, coming in, speaking faith. And, I just always kept some type of faith, as well as, my parents always told me, even when on bad days, if I call home, they was always saying, you getting out of that place, you getting out. things such as that right there, kept me hopeful and kept me with faith. And, just that environment, you don't want to live in that environment forever, or, in that situation. Like Miss Pat say, like it's guys that's just curiosity of sitting in, like when you just want to try to like escape this place when you can't go nowhere physically. People turn into drugs. People trying drugs in this place like this to escape all this stuff. And, that ain't good. When a person like that, that guy never tried drugs, curiosity set in, like, I wonder what that feel like. And then when you do this, when you try drugs and then you become an addict, and then it's almost like it's no way of coming back. It's no way of like getting yourself back straight. And some people getting hooked to this stuff and they dying. They dying overdosing off this stuff that's in there. And it's just bad. But because people losing hope, people losing faith after so long. I'm saying like maybe like you may say like, well, I probably said 5 years is not a long time, but y'all on the line may say 5 years is a long time. But I can only say that because I have done over that amount of years. But, to a person that been there 20 plus years, 30 years, going on 40 years, like you said, she know a friend of hers that like, it's like he's coming down with dementia and the mind starting to leave. I know a brother just like that. He was in prison. He was sharp. He was sharp with the word of God. And this man was like a good brother. And I see him now like on the street. It's like he's going through that same thing, like losing his mind, like his mind is just leaving from it. It's like, I'm not really just blaming it all on incarceration, but I think that played a big role right there, just doing so many years. He did like 30 years. Now I see him now. It's just like, this guy's not the same. Like he don't even know almost to the point that who I am anymore. But he got out. He OS after so many years. He never got granted parole that I know of. But it's like now the brother just like, man, it's just gone. And you just got to grab hold of something. Not no drugs or nothing like that, but you just got to have in your heart and in your mind that there's one day that I want to be released to have some type of hope and faith. Because if you don't, you will resort into the same stuff. Because the people not letting people go as they expecting on this time when they tell them that, hey, you're going to come back up in this year of December. And you done did all that they done told you to do. You done stayed inside the guidelines of behavior, everything that you need to do. When you set me off the last time, you didn't give me no reason 2 years ago to say why you turned me down. You just said, okay, we deny him. Okay, we'll see him again in 2 more years. In 2 more years, you're expecting, okay, I done went through this, so I'm finna be granted parole. When you get turned down, that the next time, it devastates you after doing so many years, and then, there you go. There it is. But I just thank God, man, that I was able to just stay strong, for all those years that I was incarcerated, and keep a mindset of being hopeful and have faith that I was coming home one day. And I came.
Thank you so much for that, John. And John also, and I didn't say this, but he goes back and he still does a lot of work on the inside. So the church that he attends, they do a lot of service work on the inside, which I think is awesome. So thank you for that, John. So am I going to turn this back over to Anisha? Because that was our last question. I want to thank each and every last one of our panelists. Each and every person on this screen is near and dear to my heart. So I just want to thank you all for just being here today, for participating with us, and for being supportive of Alabama Justice and our continued movement work. This is not the end, guys. This is only the beginning. Our legislative session will start, and we're going to have the best legislative session ever. This is my powerhouse right here, y'all. So I'm super, super excited for everything that is about to happen. May God continue to bless you and keep you. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight.